Police unions have come under fire in 2017 perhaps more than any time in recent memory, so we thought it worth delving a little more deeply into a new book co-authored by one of the leaders of the Texas police union movement, Rhonda Lord, who for many years led the Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas, and today is a freelance labor consultant for police unions. In particular, Chapter 11 of his book gives police union leaders advice on how to deal with critical incidents like controversial shootings or beatings that are caught on camera. They suggest police union leaders wrap themselves in the flag, blame victims of police misconduct for their plight, and drag out the process as long as possible, hoping the public will forget. Mandy, what did you think of his advice?
It's hard to wrap it up into like a single thing. I think that if you were really to take a look at his advice as a whole, I think a lot of it makes sense. I mean, where he sort of goes off the rails a little bit in terms of like what we would want of a police union is that he really is advocating for blaming the victims, like beyond the scope of their own responsibility.
Demanding accountability and defending your rights against the police specifically, and the government generally, are difficult and dangerous tasks. Your right to watch the government and record what you see is a natural right that is protected by the Constitution, and it cannot be taken away by the government.
This is an update to the Spokane County Corruption Watch video I did recently regarding Deputy Chad Gorton. A link to that video and all of my sources for this video are in the description. I encourage you to check them out for yourselves. Shortly after posting the original video, I was contacted by someone close to the situation who explained to me what happened. Simply put, Chad Gorton isn't guilty of doing anything that couldn't happen to any one of us with our jobs in the private sector. Basically, Chad took the company car out for a drive that wasn't approved. He had a family dinner to attend, and to make life easier for himself, he took his patrol car in order to save himself the hassle of having to return home after the dinner. I'm guessing at a pretty high rate of speed since the deputy had to pay the county for the wrecked vehicle himself. This is the reason he was fired and then rehired. I'll get back to that important issue in just a moment. First, I want to break this down. This incident doesn't make Chad Gorton corrupt or a bad guy. It shows that, like all of us, he doesn't always make the best decisions. That being said, because of his job, it's my personal opinion that he can't be considered a good guy. This is a confusing topic to a lot of people, especially those who don't like cops because of what most of their job entails. Yet they also know cops that are good people, caring for their families and friends just like the rest of us. They see stories of cops rescuing a victim from a burning car and think, how can these guys be considered bad? Here's why I think there's no such thing as a good cop. First, let's establish one thing. A cop is a job. Law enforcement. Enforcement of laws. Not a person. No matter how good of a person they are off duty, while on duty, the vast majority of what they do consists of extorting money from free people for breaking statutes, aka rules written down on pieces of paper by a small group of people designed to control the rest of us. Most of those rules have nothing to do with morality, but rather control. Mind you, if you don't agree to pay your extortion fees, they will threaten you with violence and possibly even confinement to a cage. Then, another big part of their job is to actually take people to cages for victimless crimes. You know, like the war on drugs, which is really a war on people. This has nothing to do with right and wrong or morality. The victim is the state in these cases. If we didn't call them a government and cops, they would be considered organized crime for their behavior. But because every few years, roughly half the population decides to suggest who should be their masters by voting, we call it a democracy and say we have freedom. Have you ever heard the statement, democracy is like two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner? When it comes to real crimes, where there are victims like theft, assault, and murder, order followers show up after the fact once the perpetrator has already left. They take pictures, write down notes, and do an investigation to try to capture the person after the fact. We could and would do that on our own, probably with a much higher success rate as well. Just go check out your local police department's unsolved crimes list and then get back to me on that. I bet, without even looking for myself, almost none of the unsolved crimes have the victim listed as the state. I bet most of those unsolved crimes have real victims instead. If you knew someone to be a thug for the mafia, let's say your friend is an enforcer for the mafia. During his day job, he goes around threatening and or carrying out violence against those who don't follow the orders or the will of his boss. When he goes home, he does homework with his kids, he's a great, caring husband to his wife, and appears to be a good guy. Would you still befriend this person if you knew what his job was? Would you be able to be friendly with him because, well, you know, he's a good guy. He's just doing his job while he's at work. I'm guessing most of you are shaking your heads no. That's what we say about cops. They're just doing their jobs. I'm asking you to recognize your cognitive dissonance and examine the facts I have just laid out. What is so different between the mafia scenario and the government scenario? It's because of this I choose not to have any cops as friends. I don't care how good of a friend or family member someone is. I choose not to associate with people who threaten violence and confinement to a cage towards people who haven't hurt anybody, anyone else's property, or defrauded anyone. Like I said before, Deputy Gorton isn't some bad guy because he used the company car without permission and broke the laws of our masters while doing so. In fact, I'm sure there are many employed in both the private and public sector that do this sort of thing and don't really even think about it. So let me be clear and state it again. I don't think Deputy Gorton is a bad guy or corrupt for what happened while he was driving his department-issued patrol car at a time he wasn't approved to be using it. I do want to take a closer look at the facts of the case as they have been presented to me, not by our supposed transparent masters in government, but instead by someone close to Chad in the situation. Deputy Gorton chose to drive his patrol car for an unapproved activity at a time he wasn't supposed to be driving it. He was using the taxpayers' property without permission, and while doing so, speeding at a high enough rate of speed that the car was totaled because of the wreck that occurred when he wasn't on duty or supposed to have the vehicle. I want those of you who work for a private company to ask yourself, if you were in the same situation with your company, what would happen? Using the company vehicle on your own time, without permission, breaking the rules of the road, putting others at risk with the company property, and all of this resulting in a wreck with the company-owned property now totaled. Do you think you'd still have a job? Deputy Gorton, or as I will refer to him from here on out, as Order Follower Gorton, still does. I was told by my source that the union is what saved Chad Gorton's job. Without the union, I was told Gorton would have been fired. It's also my opinion, based on observed actions with these enforcement units, he probably would have obtained work after a couple of months with another unit in another location. I've never understood, nor I imagine will I ever understand, why employees of the government or any employees of the public sector need unions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I learned way back in high school, unions were originally established in this country to help workers unite against the deplorable working conditions they faced when trading their labor for money from the large corporations of the day, seeking the most profit by any means necessary. I'm not going to get into all of that right now because we're discussing employees paid by the state or any other entity extorting money from free people with the threat of violence and confinement to a cage. I'm told all the time that I'm wrong about taxes and it's not theft. I'm told it's my civic duty to give up a certain amount of my productivity to support others. I don't see it that way, but let's play the extortion game for just a second and see if you get my reasoning for not supporting any unions backing workers that derive their income from sources where it's not voluntarily given up. Taking another look at Order Follower Gorton here, he gets all of his income from Spokane County, a corporation that calls itself a government so it can steal its income through things they call taxes. Calling them taxes rather than extortion or theft makes people compelled to pay them without having to use the violence their enforcement units are trained and ready to inflict for those individuals exercising freedom and liberty. This is called compliance, and it's practiced by the vast majority of individuals through a combination of programming and self-preservation. Gorton's income is stolen from the hardworking people of Spokane County through taxes on purchases, licenses, property, and the list goes on. Yeah, I know, it's disgusting, right? Look at all that income that the right to be secure in your persons and properties brings into our rulers. Not only does this man steal his livelihood from the rest of us, he then takes part of that stolen money and uses it to pay for the police union to fight to save his job, when we, the people who supposedly make up the government that gave him the said job, decided we don't want him to have it anymore. Whether it's because we don't want to pay him anymore, or he screwed up and broke the laws he himself is supposed to enforce and totaled a decent amount of property we paid for. Let me just say that again. We, the people, elected a person to hire enforcers of laws. We set up rules for our employees to follow by voicing our opinions and voting in a sheriff that allegedly holds these same values. Then, when Gorton or other order followers break those rules, instead of getting fired, he uses a well-paid team of lawyers and experts to fight tooth and nail for his job. Keep in mind, the money he used to pay for this team fighting for his job was taken from the people who are now trying to remove the rule-breaking order follower from said job. Is that not insanity? Police unions are dangerous in many other ways. Now keep in mind, I'm only focusing on law enforcement unions because they protect the thin blue line gang. There are, however, unions covering almost all of government employees. It's the same situation there. Welfare recipients deriving their income from a pool of money stolen off the labor of supposedly free people, then giving some of that stolen money to a union who will fight to preserve the public sector job against the wishes of those paying for these jobs. Unions representing the public sector have so much more power than those representing the private sector. Public sector unions will use their experts and money to buy privileges and good standing among our rulers in government. Yeah, unions for private sector workers can do this too. We all know it as lobbying. And while I don't believe we should have any masters whom individuals or corporations can use wealth and power to purchase favor with, the reality is we do, and it's called government. I want to step away from this story involving order follower Gorton for a second and show you another instance of how police unions are so dangerous to the freedom of everyday people. I recently read an article from May 30th regarding members of the Spokane Blue Line Gang Unit using excessive force. Just like normal, these cops escalate situations to a point where they can justify to any jury members if it goes to court they needed to use force out of fear for their safety. Normal people, not given authority over others by our masters, have to de-escalate by nature to avoid confrontations. These enforcement thugs have been convinced and taught they are heroes, and when they say jump, if we don't immediately jump or ask how high, they have a valid reason to fear for their lives. Then if a civilian gets injured or killed in the process of these enforcers carrying out their duty, well, they were just doing their jobs. And guess who saves those jobs? That's right, the police union. What I will relate next is just the latest example. According to an article in the Inlander back in February of this year, several Spokane police officers apprehended a suspect inside a stopped car by using extremely aggressive tactics. Nobody would have even known about this incident had it not been for a local blogger asking the city's police ombudsman about the incident. Our local corporate media is too busy establishing these thugs as heroes, instead of the extortion agents and freedom inhibitors they are. Reports from at least one witness at the scene and people who have seen the video have these order follower thugs who masquerade as heroes shouting things like, "I'm gonna put a bullet in your head," and having the suspect's hands up stating he was gonna exit the vehicle when a canine assault unit was lifted into the car after the thugs broke the windows of this man's property. The problem here is the union and city officials are blocking members of the city council from seeing the body cam footage of the incident unless all council members sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing them from discussing what they see with anyone else. So what we have here again is these thug order followers doing what they're trained to do. This time, members of the public have taken issue with the use of aggressive force against someone who is presumed innocent until proven guilty. This is what our government is supposed to be all about. People standing up to power and the force of government and wanting their voices heard. What we have instead is, again, these thug enforcement units hiring well-paid experts and attorneys to fight for and keep their jobs and tactics, using money stolen from taxpayers to make sure the taxpayers aren't able to see the truth behind the system they pay for. This is simple stuff. If you were voluntarily doing business with the company, you'd withhold any money you volunteer up for their services until the problem is discussed to your satisfaction, or a resolution is achieved that is acceptable to you. This voluntary support is what makes the company change its ways. If it keeps using bad practices or the same tactics, it will continue to lose monetary support. By nature, to survive, the business changes its ways and we all carry on, or it doesn't and it goes away, but the rest of us carry on about our lives. With government, it doesn't work like that. First off, we're forced to pay our support to these corporations calling themselves incorporated cities, counties, states, and countries. If we simply choose not to because we don't support their tactics or views, they send gangs of armed thugs after us to make us comply with threats or actual violence. There is no incentive to change their ways. Then, on top of that, if enough of us do convince our masters we need a change, and say, for instance, we want transparency to see if these thug enforcement units are overstepping their grounds, they have highly paid experts to use the laws and statutes they created to maintain the status quo and quell any independent or liberty-minded thinking. Let's start talking about the power of unions in this country. I've already done one story exposing the corruption between the Department of Energy and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union, and I'll revisit that soon and maybe some more. Public sector employees work for us, the taxpayers, not the incorporated city, county, state, or any other for-profit government entity. They don't need protection against us, the ones paying their salary. Instead, they need education on how to earn an honest living without being paid by money taken against the will of the supposedly free citizens they protect. If you like this video, support my channel by checking out all the platforms you can find Questionable Authority. Find us on BitChute and Steam It and subscribe there, where you're fairly safe from censorship. You can find all of the other Questionable Authority platforms by visiting the links in the description, and don't forget to check out the merchandise store for some great conversation starting gear. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit the like button and share it with everyone you know. Find us on Twitter, as well as censorship-free platforms like BitChute and Steam It or DTube. Of course, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to smile at someone you don't know every day.